Welcome back to Not Your Forte, a music education podcast geared towards undergraduate students to help you survive and thrive throughout your undergrad. I'm Eric Tinkler, a fourth-year music education student here at Kansas State University. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Philip Payne, the chair of the Music Ed Division here at K-State as well. And today, we're going to be starting off our new series for the month. We're going to go through Conducting Bootcamp. So grab your batons, get your score ready and everything. We're going to go ahead. We're going to talk about everything conducting. Starting off this week, we have Dr. Wimmer. We'll get to him in a bit, but past that, next week we'll be joined by Dr. Frank Tracz, director of bands at K-State, talking about score study and rehearsal prep and stuff. And we have Dr. Wimmer on. You guys might recognize him from last week, and he's a man whose favorite Disney princess is Captain America. And also, he's going to go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, good memory, and thank you again for inviting me back on the podcast. It's always been a dream of mine to be on a podcast, as I listen to many podcasts, especially nowadays, to kind of keep my mind occupied and palate fresh, so to speak. But I grew up in Nebraska. I grew up in a town called Gretna, Nebraska, which is between Omaha and Lincoln, off of I-80. Did high school, middle school in the Gretna Public Schools. And then I went and did my undergraduate at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Music education, percussion is my primary instrument. And I did that degree in 4 years. After that, I taught in the Gretna Public Schools. So that's a whole nother story for a different podcast about how I ended up back there. But, you know, it's a small world, so I ended up back there. My primary position was director of the high school bands. So I taught 9 through 12. Had a jazz program, marching band, concert band. At the high school, I also taught Guitar 1 and Guitar 2. I also taught a world percussion class and a history of rock and roll class as well, too, at the high school. Then I assisted with the middle school. I taught 6th grade percussion, and then assisted 7th and 8th grade at the middle school, and co-taught with a colleague of mine who actually got me started in music, Chris Tucker, so I give a shout out to her. So ended up, being taught by her, and then ended up working with her. So again, circle of life comes back around there. After that, I went to K-State to pursue my master's in music with an emphasis on instrumental conducting, and then I rolled right through after that into my PhD in curriculum and instruction, and then right after that, I rolled into being the assistant director of bands here at K-State, where I am now completing my 3rd year as the assistant director of bands.
Awesome.
So that's just kind of...
Here at K-State, what all do you teach here at K-State?
I work with all of the bands here at K-State, assist with the marching band. I conduct the Wind Symphony, which is the second audition group here at K-State. I also help out with any other ensemble that has the word band at the end of it. I work with the Cat Band. That's my primary athletic band that I work with. See Dr. Payne sporting Cat Band polo there. From a couple years ago, and then classes that I teach Music 417, which is the beginning conducting course. I teach the first 8 weeks of that for both vocal and instrumental majors, and then the other half of the course is taken over by Dr. Oppenheim, one of the choir directors here at K-State, and so students are able to get the instrumental and also the vocal side of conducting because they're certified K through 12 vocal instrumental here at Kansas State University. So I teach that primarily. I also teach marching band techniques for undergraduate and graduate students in the spring. I also teach arranging for bands. It's a graduate level course, but undergrads can take that course every other year. And then I assist with Music 518, which is the advanced instrumental conducting course with Dr. Tracz. So I just sit in and help out. I also sit in on 859, which is our graduate level conducting course, advanced conducting here at K-State. And those are, for the most part, all the academic courses that I help participate with and help instruct to some degree.
Really great. Starting off, before we even dive into anything about talking about conducting, talk a little bit about your experience conducting, like when you're undergraduate and stuff. Like, what did your program look like, and how did that design it?
That's a really great question. So I was very fortunate in my undergraduate to have 3 conducting classes, and it was the sequence that I went through was a fall, spring, fall. So for conducting 1, everyone was in the same room, and I believe the instrumental and the choral directors took took turns conducting that course for the entirety of the semester. Then in Conducting 2, that was more of a focus on orchestral conducting. And some other instrumental conducting, and so the orchestral teacher at Nebraska Omaha taught that. And then my third semester, everyone split up into their vocal and instrumental disciplines, and so all the vocal majors went to vocal instruction purely, and then all the instrumental majors went to instrumental instruction purely, and that was basically a lab, and so we were all sitting in chairs. We got to conduct. My teacher Erica Neidlinger for that course, who is a great, phenomenal woman and a great conductor. She also sprinkled in instrumental techniques and rehearsal techniques as well. So I remember one class, we were all playing a piece of music, and some of us had a piece of paper on our music stand that said, in measure 25, play F sharp instead of F natural. And it was the job of the teacher that was on the podium to be able to diagnose that and be able to correctly identify using error detection and their study and knowledge of the score to be able to fix that problem. And so it was conducting, but it was also rehearsal techniques and used as a vehicle to kind of prepare us to get into the classroom. And so that was just a unique aspect of our program. Nebraska Omaha is significantly smaller than K-State, which is why they were able to do that. And so I was just really lucky to be a part of that, to be able to have 3 semesters to focus on conducting. I also took conducting lessons my senior year as an individual study with Erica Neidlinger as well. And that's kind of what got me started, and then I taught. And then as I was teaching, I kind of, conducting was something that I really resonated with. I felt a direct connection between myself and my students, and it was just a really powerful influencer in my development as a teacher and a current motivator for me as a teacher right now. And so, I started looking around for graduate schools. I looked around at conducting symposiums. I started doing some local conducting symposiums that were offered by the Nebraska Bandmasters Association. So if you are listening to this and if you're looking to be an aspired conductor, I know that a lot of state bandmasters and MEA organizations have conducting symposiums or workshops that you can participate within your state, as opposed to going out of state and doing like the Michigan State Symposium or the University of Texas Symposium, but that's an aside. So I started getting involved with that, and as I started doing that, I really enjoyed conducting and saw how it complemented and enhanced my ability as a teacher and as a musician and as a human being who experiences emotion. And then I decided to go to my grad school and study with Dr. Tracz here at K-State, and the rest is really kind of history. So that's how I got started, and some of the key elements that really kind of sent my trajectory to study conducting full time, and how that came about.
Before we dig too far into the whole process, what was one thing that you remember that you drew upon from your undergraduate conducting experience, and then what was one thing that you wish you would have taken more time to dig into while you were an undergrad?
So let's see, I think I can answer both of these questions with this one response. At the end of every spring, so we had 2 concerts in the spring. In between those 2 concerts in the spring, there was a couple of rehearsals where our director of bands, Dr. Jim Saker, who conducted the top group, would allow undergraduates to conduct a piece with that ensemble. And so I applied for that opportunity as a junior, and I got to conduct Mark Camphaus's Yosemite Autumn, which is a gorgeous piece of music. So gorgeous that I programmed it for the Wind Symphony to perform at KMEA last spring. And so that was a really cool moment to, that piece started my conducting career, so to speak, and it also kind of led me to my first, benchmark, my first major capstone as a professional conductor, so it has a really significant meaning. But anyways, I got to conduct that piece with our top group, and just that experience, so I knew the music because I had played it in the back as a percussionist. I was one of those students who would when I wasn't playing and I wasn't working on 4-mallet technique or snare drum technique on a pad, I was watching the conductor and just writing down notes and copying patterns. And we didn't have scores available, but I would peek over and look at the trumpet music or the tuba music or the trombone music and try to be able to follow along and put things together. So I knew the music pretty well, but being able to physically experience that was absolutely terrifying, but also exhilarating at the same time. I remember coming off the podium, and like I couldn't let go of my baton because I was so tense, but there was just so much adrenaline going into me that, hey, I conducted a top group at a university as a 20-year-old in undergraduate, and so it was an incredible experience. The one thing that, you know, I wish I would have done more to lead up to that experience was listened to my teaching prior to, was just practicing the basics and fundamentals. And so I kind of had to reverse engineer my understanding of fundamentals as I was a teacher, because I didn't learn habits 100% foundationally as an undergraduate. And, you know, as an undergrad, as you are all listening and living right now or have lived, you're just being pulled a million different ways. And so you got to try to balance studio work, coursework, extra classes that are part of your degree but that you're never going to use, like the science of rocks and stuff like that. So it was just, I just didn't take enough time to practice the fundamentals. And I actually, as a percussionist, I allowed that to kind of be my excuse. So because I hold the drumstick the same way that I hold my baton, I don't need to work on some of those details as much because I can just be able to bridge those skills together. Then as I started teaching, I realized, oh, my bridge wasn't strong enough. The foundation of the pillars that hold this bridge across, you know, they're crumbling because of my bad posture, my bad technique, my inefficient ergonomics and kinesthetics to everything that involves, you know, moving through space. So to answer your question, that's one thing I really remember, because it was such a powerful experience. But then it really taught me, hey, you definitely didn't spend enough time doing the cone drills that coach told you to do before going out on the court or onto the gridiron, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right, that's a perfect kind of segue. Just diving into the topic, we were talking about building up a foundation and fundamentals and everything. This is what this episode's all going to be about: the basics, where to start or where to try to remember that you started, if anyone's already been through this, to get back to those basics. You mentioned baton and even something as simple as like just holding the baton and needing to understand the fundamentals behind that. Do you want to talk a little bit about just like baton technique and starting out, like what do you do when you grab a baton?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my baton here. So for those of you that are listening, I'll try to do my best to use, you know, enough descriptives so you can imagine. So your baton is, you know, it is your instrument, and so it's not just a stick that you hold and you wave in the air or that you hit on the podium. You know, for me, the baton is your instrument, and you need to value it and have a mindset to approach it like you would your French horn, your marimba, your trombone, your oboe, your clarinet. And that's, you know, that's a difficult mindset to have for so many of us because of how little time we get to experience it. So I have a teardrop baton. It's a Mahler baton with a carbon fiber shaft. I like carbon fiber because it doesn't warp. If you have a wooden baton, as time goes on, or if you hit the music stand a lot, or, you know, if you run into something by accident, it will warp and it will no longer be straight. So carbon fiber allows it to stay straight. It's very durable. I've had this baton since 2014, and I still use it with every single ensemble, every single concert. I don't have a special baton that I use for a concert because I like the feel of this and I like the weight of it. And that's the next thing I'll talk about, is to be able to find a baton that's balanced. So, you know, there's a lot of schools of thought. So this is the school of thought that I have. So you take your baton and you want to be able to balance it between the handle and the beginning of the shaft on this first knuckle of your index finger. And so I try to make that perpendicular to my index finger. So the next thing that I will do is I will take the pad of my thumb, and I will make sure that the pad of my thumb is parallel with the shaft of the baton and is perpendicular to my index finger. And then after you do that, you kind of create a little space in the palm of your hand, of your right hand. I will gently not grip. I will not gently clasp, but I will just support the handle of my baton with the rest of my fingers. And this goes back to my percussion techniques. The more contact you have on the baton, the more control you're going to be able to have of the tip of the stick. And so that's, you know that I'm really big about making sure you have contact with your fingers and not allowing space, because the more space you have, the more chances for inaccuracy and lack of control you have with your baton. So that's the basic grip. And then from there, The baton is an extension of your arm. It's not a literal extension. So for those of you that are watching the YouTube video, a lot of people will try to make the baton, kind of line up exactly with their arm and then put a lot of tension on their wrist. I am a big proponent of just good ergonomics. So if you were to allow your arm just to drop down and bring your arm up, your arm is going to curve and the baton is going to continue along with that. So the tip is not supposed to be 90 degrees, or right in front of you, and painting drawing on a piece of paper 90 degrees in front of you. It's going to be curved a little bit, and it's just going to allow just for more efficiency and reduced tension. And so just like with anything, especially with sports, the more tension that you have, just the worse things get over time. They might be easy right now, but as time goes on, they're gonna really get you as far as tension goes. So that's just the baton and the grip in a very crash course sense. But the weight of the baton has got to feel good in your hand. I like a particular for when I play marimba, I like using these particular mallets. When I play snare drum, I like these drumsticks. When I play drum set, I like these drumsticks because of the way that they feel in my hand. The baton is the exact same way. And so I'm one of those people, when you go to conventions, I'm standing at a booth, at the Mahler booth, and I'm touching like every baton, which you shouldn't be doing right now, but I'm touching every baton. I'm, doing the figuring out if it's balanced, and, I'm conducting in the air, just make sure that it feels good. So that's, in a matter of 4 minutes, my approach to grip with the baton.
So now that we kind of, at least theoretically, we know how to hold a baton now, where's the next step? How do we get on that podium? How do we start the ensemble? And just what follows that? I can hold the baton, but what do I do with it?
Right, so we'll start with the foundation of you as a conductor, which is your posture and your stance. So, just like any athlete, just like any beginning musician, you need to have a solid foundation in how you approach your instrument, which is going to be from your posture. So I'm a big fan of keeping your feet shoulder width apart. I'm not a big, I tend to stand with my feet together. But shoulder width apart is a good stance so that you can just feel grounded, that you can feel good connection to the ground beneath you and underneath your hips. And so I like to have a pretty tall posture. So feet on the ground, feet apart, ankles in line with your pelvis in line with your shoulders. I like having your sternum up, your shoulders back, and then as far as your arms go, I'm a big fan of extending your arms past your torso. Music is three-dimensional, it's not two-dimensional. Tempo and pulse is two-dimensional. So if your arms are locked into you, I call this kind of a T-Rex position, you are only communicating two-dimensional information, basically time and where you are in time. And when your arms are out and extended, you're actually able to, to utilize space in a three-dimensional fashion and be able to communicate musically in a three-dimensional fashion with your arms out. So I like having, standing nice and tall, shoulders back, not chest pushed out like Superman, but your sternum up, having your heart exposed to the ensemble, and having your arms out, and then your head just being in line with your shoulders, in line with your hips, so that you can have efficiency, and your body can be set at zero. I think it's really important that you understand how your body balances. That's how my body balances. And when your body's balanced, again, that's a place of minimal tension for you. So if you are hunching forward, you're putting unnecessary tension somewhere. If you're overextending, you're putting unnecessary tension somewhere else. And so for me, ergonomics and kinesthetics of how your body functions in space is something that's pretty important. Something that I don't think is talked about enough because we just don't have the time to really deep dive into it, which is part of the reason why I mentioned I wish I would have spent more time on fundamentals as an undergrad. And here I am trying to teach everything in 8 weeks, and and that's one of the things that I have to kind of skip over just a little bit because you can teach someone how to stand, but you got to be able to stand and be able to have independence with your arms after that. So that's where to start a crash course. But standing up in a comfortable position and putting your body in a position to have the least amount of tension is going to be the biggest thing. And that's something that you as an individual have to understand. I grew up playing sports and weightlifting competitively, and so I have a pretty good understanding of how my body functions and where tension exists within a certain position. the other day I was running and I felt my sternum tense up. And people, I thought I knew right away, okay, so I'm leaching forward too much. I need to elevate my posture and just roll my shoulders back if I can just a little bit so I can kind of alleviate this tension in my sternum. And that's just what it means for me. And so I think one thing that I think undergrads kind of get shorted on that you get in a master's experience or in a lesson experience is the time to really break down your posture, how it works efficiently for you. And as an undergraduate, that's really difficult and challenging to do just because you are pulled to so many ways that, it's one of the things that we choose to skip out on.
And I think that's a really good point for us to jump off a little bit, talking about that efficiency. So there are things that, if I always make the joke with our music ed majors that if we taught them everything they needed to know, they would be in school for about 200 years and they would never get a chance to actually go out and teach. So one of these things is trying to figure out where are these parallels in everything that we do. And I think that you call it the ergonomics, but understanding efficiency of how our bodies operate is so important in everything that we do, whether that's teaching, whether that's conducting, whether that's practice, whether that's performance. Everything centers on how we can eliminate as much tension as possible. So it's not just enough to be able to think about it from conducting perspective, but also from when you're sitting in the practice room, how do you eliminate all of that tension? Because the way that you're sitting is essentially going to be the way that you're standing. And all of those things that you do, then you have to think through, how am I going to teach that to my beginners? How am I going to teach that to that first year choir when they're coming in for the very first time? How are we going to talk about that? How do I put that into words? And Dr. Wimmer, I think you've done such a great job of being able to describe that. And everybody has to kind of figure out what that is for them and how they would describe it and how they would teach it. Because I think, I'm foreshadowing one of our shows later on, but talking about it's great for us to be able to do this. Now we also have to think about how are we going to teach this? How are we going to share this? And so you brought up some great points for those that are vocalists, for our listeners that are going to be choir directors. This same thing goes for your voice. Is that you have to, and I would even go as far to say also our band directors, because one of the things that you're going to find out from the podium is how you communicate, how you stand, how you eliminate that tension is also going to affect your voice. And if you try and talk over, or if you try and talk too loudly or too forcefully, eventually your voice is going to go because there's nothing like the way that you talk during a public school session. And so all of that is interrelated. So I just wanted to draw that connection.
Yeah, and before we move off of this topic, some of the people that you think that would be the best beginning conductors, percussionists, they have the worst posture because when you watch them perform, we are kind of taught to kind of hover over our instruments, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do as a conductor. You don't want to be hovering over the score. You want to elevate your body so that you can be presenting yourself to the ensemble. Wind players and vocalists have the best posture because they are in general taught to do that as they perform. I had to kind of, spend a lot of time, when I'm playing percussion, I have to think, okay, so I'm no longer a conductor. I'm not going to play with my chest out and, trying to making sure that, I have good, a good visual representation of where my chest is. I'm going to allow myself to collapse so that I can just, go back to that muscle memory that I've trained myself to do. But sometimes when I'm a conductor, I catch myself, I feel like when I conduct emotional music, I associate that with marimba playing, and my body automatically goes into, if I'm playing the marimba, and that's something that I still have to kind of navigate and to kind of negotiate within myself is not letting myself slip into those old habits of posture. So just one thing, as an instrumentalist, those that are listening, how you perform, like Dr. Payne says, is how more than likely you're going to look when you're on the podium. So to acknowledge there's a difference between your primary instrument and your conducting instrument, and then there has to be a shift in approach to posture and just the physics of everything that you're doing as well too, the physical aspects of what you do.
So we've talked a lot about kind of like the physical aspects of things that you're going to have to shift. And I'm sure anyone can tell you that the first time they step on a podium, it's a completely different shift, not just like how you're standing, but in like your mindset. I know you add a little bit of vibrato to your baton sometime when you're getting those early experiences on the podium. Just what's that shift? How do you begin that shift from a student in an ensemble to a conductor and leader of the ensemble?
That's the $1 million question. And I can't remember if I said this last week on the pod, but I'm a big believer that everything in life is the same. Fundamentally, how you approach everything in life is the same. We just have to be able to bridge things together. You have these musicians who are great musicians. They're great on their primary instruments. They're intelligent. They do everything they're supposed to do. Then they get on the podium, and then that first downbeat comes down, and they just kind of flop around, and they just, what do? I don't know what to do with my left hand, and just your mind goes blank. And so it's just a matter of I hate saying this because I want to try to defy this a lot of times, but it's conducting is just one of those things where because it's so foreign to you as a musician. And if you think about it, all the way from kindergarten all the way through your sophomore or junior year of college, you have been approaching music in one way as a performer, and now you're all of a sudden expected and asked to go on the other side, literally, of the podium and do it as a teacher and as a physical communicator. So it's really hard to rewire, and I think you guys talked about this on the pod, further back. It's really hard to rewire your brain to go from performer to teacher conductor, and no matter how prepared you are, how much your score is marked, how much fundamental technique you feel like you've grounded into the ground, it's just harder to make that shift. And so the more that you do it, the easier it becomes, but there's still going to be that minefield of no man's land where you're gonna every step is gonna be a mine that's gonna throw you back 20 feet, and then you got to regain ground again. So I don't really have a good answer aside from just understanding, just having a good solid foundation and fundamental technique physically before you get on the podium, having a good understanding of the score so that you can attempt to play the inner game with yourself once you step on that podium. And it's really what that is we are our worst enemies, our hardest critics, and we just don't give ourselves the light of day when we step on the podium because we're just placing judgment on ourselves, placing judgment on people that might be judging us, placing judgment on those people that might be judging us that shouldn't be judging us because we're all in the same boat. And it's just all of these mind games that we play. So a lot of it's physical, but a lot of it I think is really mental.
And I think a really important thing to know is, especially when you're in like a beginning conducting class, it's just like learning any other instrument. Oftentimes, we as musicians, you mentioned that we're our biggest critics. And by the time we're getting our sophomore, junior year of college, we're at some of the finest music making of our careers so far and stuff. So we have high standards already. And I really think that it's not going to be great to start out when you first start conducting. And I think as music majors, just having to take that step back and be like, okay, this is just like when I started learning my instrument. This is completely new, completely foreign to me. It's a techniques class is what it is. Like if you're taking a woodwind tech class or anything like that. And I think approaching it as thus, be like, okay, this is not going to be great to start out with, but I'm going to work and get better. The teacher's going to help me get better. I'm going to continue to practice and find the resources that will help me get better. And then you'll see that progression going along, and you'll save yourself a little bit of stress of being afraid to watch yourself.
Well, and I think the other side that we have to really think about this is it's also the direction that all this goes. So we talked a little bit about the mental game. Two researchers, Fuller and Baum, did a study. This would have been actually 45 years ago now. So in 1975, and they really broke it down. There's this fluid situation that we operate in. And when we get in front of a group for the very first time, we're really focused on us. What do I look like? How am I coming across to my students? What is my pattern like? What do I look like? Am I conveying enough to them? Are they getting what they need from me? And everything is focused around us. And so you can kind of tell, even in our own conversation, we're talking about everything that we do as teachers. And we have to understand that that's what we would call essentially level one. Now, it's a much more nuanced argument than this. We just don't have time to really dig into the article that much. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to kind of give you like this overall aspect of what our brains actually go through. And it's actually fluid. It's not like a step where once you get to step 2, you never go back to step 1. There's there's something that happens in the give and take of a classroom, that it can be this fluid situation. But that first time you get in front of somebody, what you're describing is that level one, where you're so worried about what's happening around you and what you look like and how you're presenting yourself, that you miss about 95% of what you hear. So a lot of times, and I'm sure Dr. Wimmer can attest to this when he works with U-band conductors or any graduate conductors, and the first time they get in front of an ensemble and they come off the podium and you say, "What did you hear?" And they're like, "I have no idea." Yeah, it just goes, it goes right past them. You know, and that's totally normal. And so one of the things that I share in secondary methods course is that you should record every single ensemble, like every rehearsal, your first couple years, because even as you grow and get better, there's still so much that goes past your ears because you're still working through that. That's what Dr. Wimmer called the inner game. You're working on trying to figure out, how do I get outside of my own bubble? Because then once we get to level two, we start thinking about, all right, so what are the students experiencing? Level three is getting to, all right, now, how am I impacting their learning through what I'm doing? So, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that portion of this discussion a couple episodes from now when we bring on Dr. Raiber. We're going to be talking about teaching from the podium and what that looks like. But just understand that you're going to go through those. And there are going to be times when you take a new job. And when you take a new job, guess what? You're going to go right back to level one. It doesn't matter if you have 15 years experience, 20 years of experience. And just as foreshadowing, that's going to be one of my first questions to Dr. Raiber when we have him on the show, is what was it like when you stepped back in front of a middle school ensemble for the first time in 20 years? What did that feel like? Did you have that same experience and those same jitters? Because it happens on a daily basis. And it might even happen if you've taught at a school for 10 years. This pandemic, I can guarantee you, the first time you step in front of an ensemble again after being apart for so long, it's going to move you around. You're going to feel different. The whole place feels different. It's okay. Experience it as it is. Know that it's going to happen. And then we just move on. It's the awareness that is much more important.
Mm-hmm.
So before we kind of dive a little bit deeper in like techniques and stuff and resources available, there's one thing, and if anyone's seen Talladega Nights, like, what do I do with my hands? Specifically, like just talking about the left hand, it's something that I know going through beginning conducting classes or conducting university band, it's still something that I'm developing and figuring out, like, what do I do with this hand that doesn't have a baton? What's kind of advice that you have, Dr. Wimmer, for developing like fluidity or independence in this weird appendage you have?
Yeah, so as a percussionist, independence and exercises dealing with paramutations are absolutely key to be able to play the drum set with all four limbs going at the same time, or to be able to play a multi-percussion piece where you're holding two mallets in one hand, you're holding one mallet across your body with another hand, and then you're doing something different with your foot. And so my approach to that with beginning conducting, and so I'm basically teaching, where the floor, where the walls, and where the ceiling is, so that you know where the rules are, you know where the boundaries are. How I approach that is, your right hand will conduct time, and then your left hand will show something musical. So that's kind of how I break it down, so that we can isolate as a beginner. Okay, so you're doing a good job of showing your music with the left hand, but you need to work on your right hand. So let's isolate, drop the left hand, work on the right hand. Then also vice versa too. There are students that are that are in the opposite scenario. So one exercise that I actually recommend doing is conducting a 4/4 pattern, at a smaller dynamic level. We all can conduct big. We all can be the drum major. That's not going to be a problem. Where I think where we need to focus more as conductors, especially beginning conductors, is conducting in a smaller space. And so I like using, I want you to conduct inside a post-it stamp. I want you to conduct inside a note card. I want you to conduct inside my phone. In university band, I'll be in the back of the room and I'll hold up my phone and I'll point, okay, so I want you to conduct 1, 2, 3, 4 inside my phone to be able to reduce that pattern. So conduct a 4/4 pattern with your right hand, and then with your left hand on beat 1, you're just going to give a cue. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cue. So you bring your arm up and down. Cue. Now we're going to move to beat 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Beat 3, beat 4, etc., etc. Change the pattern. 3, 4, 2, 4, 5, 4. So at least you're experiencing the timing of when you need to engage and disengage your left hand. Once you're able to engage and disengage in time in an efficient manner, then you can start talking about, use of lob-in gestures, or use of Elizabeth Green style gestures to be able to get to that gesture and then go back away from it too. So you can't look musical if you can't move in time and if you can't coordinate that all within yourself. So that's one thing that I teach my undergraduates, and I think, Eric, you can attest to this too, because you went through my conducting palindrome. I'm all about creating exercises that put your body. It's just like a drill. Like I mentioned, doing cone drills as an athlete. You do those drills to replicate what could happen in a game, so your body's prepared in the game. The exact same thing as a conductor. So if you are able to experience moving through space in time at a particular point in time, isolated, that just means when you're in front of an ensemble and you're responding, you're going to be able to be moved in that fashion already, then you're going to be more likely to move in time, at any given point in time. So that's one of the things that I do to kind of help just answer the question, what do I do with my left hand? Well, you have to plan and know what to do, but before you know what to do, you actually have to have physically done that or moved in that capacity so that you can do that. A lot of people get on the podium and they go, I was planning on doing this. Well, one of my questions is, well, did you practice doing that? Did you actually break down? So if I want to give a cue on beat 3, what has to happen with my left hand on beat 2? I need to prepare that. Then on beat 1, I need to be thinking, must prepare now. Then once beat 3 happens, what do I do to retreat away back from that in a musical and in a time related area?
How does breathing play into all of this?
Oh, it's huge. It is the essential component of communicating non-verbally as a human being. The breath tells you a lot about an individual. If I were to start a conversation really tense, you can probably anticipate what types of words or at what vigor those words are going to come out of my mouth. If it's you can also tell something different too. So the breath has everything to do with it. And the same thing too, that breath has to occur in the appropriate style, tempo, and dynamic. And it also has to, tempo is important. It has to happen in time. So if you're going to give a cue on beat 2, to prepare that cue, you need to move on beat 1. You also need to breathe on beat 1 to help enter into sound the person you're going to give that cue on. 2, 3, 4. Or if it's on beat 4, 1, 2, 4. So the breath is directly tied to that gesture, and it's directly tied to the physical and the non-physical non-verbal portion of that communication triangle, for sure.
Excellent. The last thing that kind of is an offshoot of that I think is important for undergrads too, is that initial beat. So that that first the upbeat before you come in with that first downbeat. About it being in time, because one of the biggest things that I'll see even watching student teachers is that this will be out of time and then the students are just every which way with tempo. So how do you go about practicing that?
So so when you're as a conductor, your body is a target. So you want to have the clearest target for your ensemble to be aiming at when they go to approach sound. So it goes, so conducting works because of consistency and because of contrast. And so it all starts with what do you do before you give that first prep. So standing nice and tall, looking at the ensemble, not fidgeting, not doing any extra movement, but being in a place of still and calm so that when you raise your hands to give that cue, they're going to actually respond and they're going to be able to focus in on what you're going to be doing as opposed to fixing your hair, scratching your nose, fidgeting, making sure that, your pelvis is in line and all that other stuff or whatever too. So you need to be able to prepare the ensemble by giving them quiet, calm, stillness, and control, because that's what they need for that first note. They need to see your confidence. They need to see that you know what you're going to do and that you're going to lead them forward, and that has everything to do with posture and demeanor. So start with a still demeanor, bring that up, engage with your face, with your body. Don't look down at your score for that very first note. You should have by going through K through 12 public school education, you should, and our tax dollars have paid for you to have the memory to know what those first two notes sound like. So don't look down. Music doesn't happen down at your score. It happens out in the ensemble. So set up, look at the ensemble, engage, and then breathe in time. And so that's a loaded statement. I spend probably 2 classes talking about everything that you have to do to get to that point. All the variables, calming yourself down, score study, knowing where to look, getting the extra vibrato out. But I mean, that's really what it is. Conducting is just leadership. Conducting is a human experience that the ensemble will or will not join you with based on how you physically prepare yourself, which has everything to do with the breath and how that influences that prep beat. And like Dr. Payne said, if it's not in time, no wonder the bands don't come in time, because their conductor's showing them exactly how out of time they are. And so you just got to clear your mind, know exactly what to do, trust yourself, trust the group, prep, up, go, or, jump, dive, jump, up, dive, or splash. The diving board is another analogy that you use, spring, up, water. That's another thing that you can do too. So there's a lot of things in that statement, but for me, it just kind of comes down to, if you want them to play, you need to set yourself up to allow them to have that experience, which means silencing yourself, calming down, and just be able to put your money where your mouth is with your preparation, which, goes back to what we talked about, which is a whole nother issue too.
So we're talking about practice here now.
Okay, Alan.
What are some kind of basic ideas that you should take into the practice room when you are practicing conducting? What do you need to do to be efficient and effective while practicing?
So this goes back to my personal practice. So I always, I do stretching as a percussionist, a warm up, and then I have a pretty set procedure of what I'm going to do. And for a beginning conductor, this is really pretty this is really pretty good. So I recommend for conductors to practice, it's got to be at least in a 15 to 20 minute chunk. It's just not something that you can go in, wave your arms around, and be able to walk out. So doing stretches, doing some Elizabeth Green exercises with a metronome. We need to always have the metronome on as conductors, because we are entrusted with being able to give time from a cold start. So doing exercises at varying tempos, being able to work and find those spaces. Elizabeth Green exercises are what we use here at K-State, what a lot of universities and colleges use to be able to kind of warm your body up. And it's also a chance for you as the individual to kind of calm yourself down. I'm practicing conducting. I'm focusing on my breathing. I'm focusing on how I'm moving through space. I'm not worrying about my jury. I'm not worrying about the part that I don't have prepared for ensemble. I'm not worried about the paper that I have to write. It's a chance for you just to kind of clear your head and focus on, just breathing. So stretching, some stretches, some warm-ups, and then I'm really big for beginning conductors, that conducting palindrome like I mentioned, conducting a singular conducting 4/4 for 4 bars, conducting 3/4 for 4 bars, connecting 2/4 for 4 bars, and then doing at different tempo. One thing that I am a proponent of is if you are having a hard time being consistent with your ictus or approaching the plane, taking a music stand, and if you flip this music stand around, put a tick mark where you want beat 1 to be, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4, stand up, adjust the music stand so that you can actually hit it, and then be able to practice with a metronome so that you have something tactile and something visual to reassure that you're hitting your target as a conductor. Whether you're focal conducting or you're doing beat style conducting like we do at K-State, that's something that you can also do with that too. If you listen, if you're not hitting with the tip of the stick, hitting more towards the shaft, that means you're not using enough of your fulcrum or you're using too much of your arm. So there's a lot of minutia that can be established with that too. So I'm really big for beginning conductors is to conduct on something tactile so that you can be able to hear that you're making contact in time. and then also that you're just reinforcing good habits of where your plane is, or the ictus is going to approach that plane, so that you can be consistent. So again, conducting is about consistency. Because you come down on beat 1, 2, 3, 4 all at the same place, that's why you can do a gesture, show a gesture, and it makes musical sense, because you've gone from something consistent inside the box to now breaking out of the box, and showing contrast with that too. So going back to your question, I went on a tangent for a little bit. Just having a plan. So if you are working on fractional preparation in your beginning conducting class, start your warm-up by conducting in the pattern that exercise is going to be in, so that you can be efficient, you can be productive. If you are working on changing meters, conducting 4 bars of 4/4, going into a 3/4, going into a 2/4, that should somewhere be in your warm-up, so that when you actually get to practicing the excerpt, you already have that in the bag. So, it's just like practicing anything else. It's just so different because, like I said, you've gone 20-some years of your life practicing an instrument or practicing music in this way. Now you're having to relearn all of that on an expedited track and expected, and want yourself to look like Jerry Junkin or Gustav Dudamel or, any other litany of conductors that you admire too. So it's challenging. So having a plan, just like with anything else, having the discipline to be able to stick with that plan, and just being able to trust the process. You have to be able to feel pain in order to achieve gains. And that pain is growth. It's not failure. You're learning, you're growing, you're pushing your envelope and breaking down your walls. And so don't think of it as a failure that's going to paralyze you. Think of it as an opportunity for you to understand what you're not good at, and then allow yourself to be able to get better, because now you know what that weakness is, so quote unquote.
All right, just moving on past that, just what are resources available? What are kind of like textbooks or articles what are some conductors I can be watching? Just what are some extra resources that the young conductor can access so they can improve their practice, improve their knowledge?
Yeah, so whatever text is used in your conducting course at your university is probably what you should be reading. We use Basic Conducting Techniques by Joseph Labuda. This is the 7th edition. The great thing about this edition, it's a little bit pricier, but when you purchase it, you get access to a library of PDFs of those excerpts and those scores, so that you can download them to a tablet or print them off for your own practice. Plus, it gives you access to a music library where there are MIDI recordings that you can use as reference recordings. So that's really pretty nice in an ensemble where you might not have a full instrumentation to play a grade 2 or grade 3 piece. It's a good alternative. The Modern Conductor by Elizabeth Green, that is a book that every conductor should read and should possess a copy of. Elizabeth Green is the grandmother of conducting, modern conducting as we know it. And still a lot of the principles and exercises that she talks about in this book are used to this day. And it's she's one of the pillars in the profession in regards to conducting and being able to go from just a living metronome to a communicator of music from the podium. Another book that I'm a really big fan of is The Conductor's Gestures by James Jordan. So it starts talking about body mapping and use of lob-in gestures as additions to your repertoire as a conductor. And so I'm a pretty big nuts and bolts. Do this and then this happens after that kind of guy. So this book, pretty clearly outlines a lot of that, and just being able to do certain set exercises that will eventually help you make, connect, what you have in your mind and what you want to be able to show physically. That's another one. Another book that I'm a big fan of is Artistic Nuance by Ed Lisk. It doesn't talk about the basics of conducting. It talks about the aesthetics of music, but I think that's something that beginning conductors have a hard time connecting with. Is because they're learning all of these individual skills. They're learning muscle memory, physical coordination, and they completely forget about the reason why they need to learn that. And so I think that book does a good job of being able to kind of fill in the gaps to be able to help with that. So those are some resources, some textbooks, videos. I'm a huge fan of Jerry Junkin and Mallory Thompson, and so I watch videos of them conducting and videos of their students conducting as well. The list goes on and on and on, but those two are probably the top 2 wind conductors that I really enjoy watching and that I try to learn from. and be able to explore space by watching them conduct. I just am absolutely enamored by how they're able to move musically, but then at the same time to be able to, when they need to, be able to conduct like a basic conductor. Here's where one is. Here's the basic pattern, and how they're able to just be able to switch hats all the time. So those are some resources that I utilize. One thing that I wanted to double back on, beginning conductors are sometimes taught that there are 3 hinges. I would like to propose that there are 4 hinges. So you have your shoulder, your elbow, and your wrist, but you also have your fulcrum, the point of grip where you meet the baton. So I just wanted to put that in. That's something that I spend time on, is understanding what does it mean to move from your fulcrum just with your fingers versus fingers with residual wrist, versus only wrist, and then only elbow, and then only shoulder too. So being able to utilize each of those hinges will allow you to have more control and to be able to communicate more, giving you more options to show. So that was an aside, and then the resources, those are the resources that I would recommend.
And just a quick kind of thing, a lot of times these textbooks and or resources might be a little bit pricier and stuff like that. I got my own copy of the Modern Conductor. I found a first edition on Amazon, and usually you can find these are in bookstores, used versions, or oftentimes your teachers and professors at your university might have copies of these books that they're willing to let you borrow. Like Dr. Wimmer let me borrow the Conductor's Gesture. So you don't necessarily have to go out and buy all these things because these things can go expensive and stuff, but just you got resources.
Another resource that you can utilize too, there are a lot of conducting symposiums and a lot of conferences that will put PDFs of articles, lob and gesture techniques, physical body mapping stuff. There's a lot of resources out there online. Just doing a simple Google search for how to be, conducting handout or lob and handout or basic conducting handout, you'll probably find a PDF or at least an image that you can just kind of grab and be able to utilize as well too, without having to go through and buy, drop $40 on a textbook or $80 on a textbook. So, basic Googling can help you find a lot of that stuff too.
Awesome. Dr. Wimmer, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast and everything. Is there a way in which anyone listening could reach out to you to ask further questions or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to contact me would be through my K-State email, amwimmer@ksu.edu. You can certainly look me up on social media, but I don't like notifications on my phone or on my apps, and so if you try to reach out to me on Facebook and I don't know you, I probably won't friend you because I don't want spam, and I don't want just kind of creepers all over my social media platforms. But if you do need it, K-State email is the best way to reach out to me. If you sent me a DM through Twitter, Dr._Wimmer on Twitter or Alex Wimmer on Facebook, you could do that as well. But the best way would be through K-State email. I'll get back to you a lot sooner than I will on social media for sure.
Dr. Wimmer's a good Twitter follow.
I'm not. I don't know about that. I'm not very active. But when I am active, hopefully it's. I have 2 rules about social media. I only post things that are extremely genuine and heartfelt, or things that could not be misinterpreted for any reason as being bad. And the very few times I post on Twitter or social media, hopefully they're not really bad. So if you like a good laugh and you want to know what it's like to be inside my brain and inside of my house, you could give me a follow.
I want to pick your brain about one last thing that goes back to technique, is this idea of it's this language between us and our ensembles. And so how do you specifically, or how would you, if you were in, let's say, a young middle school ensemble, how do you begin to teach the students how to respond to the gestures that you're showing them?
That's a great question. So it goes back to the cliche that conductors talk too much, and our students are extremely intelligent. They're extremely resilient, and they possess more power and should gain more of our trust and respect than we allow ourselves to believe. And so in a middle school ensemble, I did this at an honor band that I was at, not last year, but a year and a half ago. So conducting is communication, and so you have to establish just what things mean. And in this ensemble, I don't remember what piece we were playing. It was a fairly slow and emotional piece of music. I did not say anything to talk about it. I didn't preface the piece. I just brought my arms up and I moved. And we played the first 40 measures of that piece really, really well without me having to get in the way by over-explaining a gesture or by hyper micromanaging this particular tempo change or whatever else too. With younger students, and I test this every single day with my daughters, 5 and 3. Just what you're able to show with your demeanor will communicate a lot. And to a middle school ensemble, yeah, they're middle schoolers. Yeah, they use too much Axe body spray sometimes. Yeah, they're off the charts depending on what time of day and what time of year. But they're human beings nonetheless. They're just they're in a younger body, but they have so much motivation and so much passion and so much to give that they want you to show them something so that they can follow you. So 9 times out of 10, by not saying anything at all, if you are able to communicate effectively through nonverbal communication and just do some of the basics of conducting really well, you don't have to worry about saying anything. Now, when you do speak, I'm a big fan of aligning words with action. And so if you are talking about tempo, you just need to make sure that you are also conducting in that same tempo so that they can see and they can be able to hear and then visually see what you're talking about. If you're talking about better breath support, just saying use more air isn't going to be as effective. You showing them what that air column could look like, showing them what direction their air could be going, that visualization will help sensitize them to your conducting gestures and to what you expect of them out of the podium. And the last thing I'll just add, this is not going to work if we just talk and show in isolation. Then when it comes to running the piece, our head goes down and we just find the wall, floor, window, ceiling. We have to put our money where our mouth is as a conductor, and engage with them in a musical conversation and be willing to put our neck out there, allow things to not be perfect with the reward of having a quality musical experience that they can use to be able to fill in so many more gaps than making sure measure 25, everyone comes in at mezzo forte with a staccato articulation on beat 1. It's just so much more. And I get the balance of being able to do that. Band directors, we are going to be technicians until band directors no longer exist. But maybe by showing more musical concepts and context, we can be able to help bridge the gap a little bit more.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Everyone, listeners, we look forward to hearing you and seeing you all next time. As always, be sure that you rate us 5 stars. It helps be able to find us a lot easier. Continue to download our shows. We continue to get the download reports and they continue to go up. So continue to share, post on social media, share with all your friends, and be sure that we get the word out there, especially with this Conducting Bootcamp that is continuing on. Next time we will have Dr. Frank Tracz from Kansas State University sharing a little bit about score study. We're available on all outlets for podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, you name it, we're there. Give us a listen, sign up, subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and we will see everyone next time.